Good evening. Got bad news for everybody. We've all been fired. No, of course not really. But that is what people think, right? You hear incident management, we think time to update LinkedIn. And that's a shame. It's a shame because it keeps us from talking about this very important practice, incident management, how to prepare for and recover from a security breach. It's a shame because it limits our ability to learn from others, to share information, and to tighten our defenses in a time when breaches are on the rise, damages are on the rise, and attackers are getting better all the time. And it isn't just us. I don't mean to make it sound like it's only Motorcity ISSA. I mean, true, Matt and I did look back at Motorcity ISSA's website. It's been a very long time since we had a talk on incident management. It isn't just us. It's also the wider security community. We took a look at the Security B-Sides website, right, which is, the international framework of conferences going back to 2009. On that website, there's a post of recordings of talks, abstracts, slides, etc. And we could find a total of 2. 2 talks on incident management going back to 2009, over 40 and 50 cities. Not just us. Not many people are talking about incident management. But today we are going to talk about it. Today we are going to cover it. We're going to look at how to work within the incident management framework utilizing a technology known as PowerShell. Here's the overflow for today, or the overview for today. I'm going to do a very quick introduction with Matt, and then we're going to jump into a scenario. This will be a little bit of fun. We'll outline a sample scenario that shows a breach, and then we'll walk through the recovery process. So then we'll wrap up and give you some points that you can go for more information. With that, let me get it on over to Mr. Johnson.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Johnson. I am a member of MISEC, but also the founder of the Michigan PowerShell User Group. I, for several years, have been a moderator on the Hey Scripting Guy forums and a judge for the scripting games. During my daytime, I am a systems analyst for a nonprofit group in Michigan, as well as I am a huge gamer and sports fan. When I'm not doing any of that stuff or talking about PowerShell, I am the father to a future hacker and a husband to an amazing wife.
I'm Wolfgang Goerlich. You guys may remember when I was out here last year that I'm the Information Systems Manager and Security Manager for a Michigan-based financial services firm. As such, I'm responsible for the software development function, network operations, and security functions. In my scant off time, I'm the lead developer for several open source projects, including SimWitty, Batori, and Incog, which was the covert channels library I covered last time I was out here. The way this talk is laid out, the way we're going to do it today, is I will be speaking from the business side of incident management. What is the practice and the policy and the procedure? And Matt's going to be applying his years of technical expertise and his deep sense of knowledge on PowerShell to actually pull this all together. So what is incident management? Incident management is a practice comprised of 6 stages. You prepare for the incident, obviously. You identify it when it occurs. And really, believe it or not, that's where most organizations fall down. If you look at like the Verizon breach report, companies can go weeks, months, sometimes even years before they identify that a breach has actually occurred. So you prepare for it. You identify it when it happens. You contain it so it doesn't spread to other systems, and then of course you clean up and recover. And then figure out what happened, apply the lessons learned to reduce the risk of a reoccurrence. So over to you, Matt.
Have you seen this before? This is a Windows PowerShell prompt. It looks a lot like the command prompt that you are familiar with in Windows, except it's blue.   and a lot more powerful. What is PowerShell? PowerShell is a task automation framework, a command line shell, and a scripting language rolled into one. This is an amazing new step forward to Microsoft. It has been around for about 6 years, but it's finally gaining some steam, especially in the Windows world. Well, exclusively in the Windows world. It's installed on every operating system since Windows 7 and 2008 R2, and it is continuing to get better in each iteration. It's tied to the Windows release cycle, so PowerShell 4, which is the next iteration, will release when the new version of Windows comes out. The current version is 3.0. It works with all the currently supported Microsoft products, and there's 2.0 and some other back releases for the downloadable clients. PowerShell is focused around what they call a commandlet, which is a lightweight command that is used in the PowerShell environment. That's the quote directly from the What is PowerShell page on Microsoft. This is the commands that you run in the shell. Like, think about it like your man command or your ls command or your dir command or your cp command, but this is the backbone of PowerShell. And some examples are up there: get help, write host, and others. Some basic language information is needed so that you kind of get the feel as we go along. And there is a naming convention that is a verb and noun. So you'll have get something, show something, set something, invoke something. And so the examples up here we have are get mailbox and new AD computer. This is what you will see when you view commandlets in PowerShell. And the verbs, the first part of the commandlet, are defined by Microsoft. There's 98 totals. Yes, you can go away from that, but I don't recommend it. And you'll see some more examples as we go along. There's also aliases to help bridge the gap. For those who have not been indoctrinated, I would say, with the commandlet philosophy, you have ls, dir, gci, which are all aliases for get child item, which shows you directory listing, registry listing, and Active Directory or whatever else object you're trying to get child items from. But 2 words of warning is you shouldn't use them in your script, and you got to be careful because people may not have some of those aliases on their box. But you want to see them all, show get alias. This will help bridge the gap for you. And get help is also your friend. An alias for get help would be man. So you can type man space get dash mailbox, and it'll give you the full help. Don't forget, get help is your friend.
All right, on to our scenario. Forget being fired. You're all hired in. Congratulations. Our scenario is a simple, small business. Not a mom and pop. Something a little bit more sizable. We got a good number of employees. Let's peg the number at 100. So 100 employees. We've got 9 servers, a new server just coming online. Very excited about this. Business case is a done deal. PO has been inked. We're ready to roll. So the 10th server is coming online. And you'll see as we install this 10th server that we make one wrong move. One wrong move, and that server is no longer ours. One move, and that bright, shiny business case and our hope for the future now belongs to these guys. And that's never a good thing. And subsequent wrong moves could damage that asset altogether, could spread the infection, could put our entire small business at risk. So before we hit the panic button, let's hit pause, hit rewind. What we're going to do is we're going to look at how PowerShell can help us prepare for, identify, and then recover from infections. Let's start at the preparation phase. The preparation for incident response begins right at the beginning. Business case is done. PO's been inked. Hey, Matt, the server's coming. Take it away, man.
No problem. It'll take me about a week to get that all taken care of for you. PowerShell is being used more extensively in the Microsoft product line as time goes on. It's part of their common engineering criteria. And you'll see it in products like Exchange, Windows, SharePoint, SQL, Link. You name a Microsoft technology, they are putting PowerShell support in there. Other vendors are supporting it well, so this makes doing incident response and management of your systems a whole lot easier. Like Citrix, VMware, Semantic, Compellent, there are tons of others that are using it as well. So part of your preparation is as you set up your new computers, and you're going to want to automate as much as possible. Doing things by hand is now seem kind of antiquated, at least in my opinion. Now with Windows 8 in 2012, deploying systems is a lot easier. You can automate everything from your install to deployment all with PowerShell. There are commands that you can configure your network interface up to install products and services and run through the configuration of those. You aren't lucky enough to have Windows 8 or 2012 in your environment, which has the latest and greatest commandlets on PowerShell. You can use things like Carbon, which is a collection of DevOps tools to be able to automate your system. You can do certificate management and a whole lot of other things with this add-on. Modules, by the way, are pieces of Microsoft PowerShell or compiled commandlets that extend the use of PowerShell, and anyone can make those. So one of the things that I do when I start with a new server is after I build it and I get to the point where I'm about ready to deploy, I start baselining everything. This up here is a script on baselining your local users. This is so that later you can compare in an incident or just in compliance checks what's going on your system. So you can check to see any new users added that we didn't know about and stuff like that. So this is a really simple script that you can point at any computer and it'll go out and pull your computer, the users on that computer. Want to do groups as well? Here's another one. Here's a great way and a simple way in PowerShell to go out and grab the groups on a PC so that you can baseline them later. You can have the information later. Here's a function which is a collection of PowerShell commands that actually goes out and grabs the local administrators. So you can point this at a computer and get all the local administrators on there. This is good because you know how it is sometimes. Somebody adds somebody as an admin just to get something done because they don't want to take the time to figure it out. This will be a great way to check that, but also in an incident to make sure that everything is working well. One of the other things that we do is we baseline services to make sure that nothing else is started, no new services are in there. One of the biggest pains that I have is people using non-standard accounts for their services. So they have something like SQL running under Bob's user account or printing Damon running under Wolf's account. We don't really want that. So there's a piece of PowerShell code that we've written called confirm service accounts that will actually go and get you information like the name of the system, the display name of the service, and what it starts under. So we can then compare that later for easy access. One of the other things that we've done is here's a PowerShell line that actually takes the registry and from the command line pulls out the information on your installed software. Give you the publisher date, the install date, all the things that would be necessary for A, a system rebuild, but B, to make sure that everything in the future is what it's supposed to be. Then what you do is once you're done baselining these things, you're going to take this information and export it using the commandlet export CLI XML. This export CLI XML commandlet actually makes a file that enables you to do things later on for comparison or configuration, and it gives you an XML file that accomplishes this. So just like in the Unix shell or sometimes in the Windows command shell, you can actually pipe one thing into another. So here we're piping the local administrators, piping content, piping properties all to the export CLI command, export CLI XML command to have your information for later. One of the other things that we do is, like I said, you can. There's a lot more PowerShell support in Windows Server 2012, and this is a commandlet to set the DNS packets logging on your Windows 2012 DNS server to be able to get the packets that are received by the server, so that you can actually go through and see what things your DNS server are being requested for.
Key practices that we covered here in the preparation phase is really leveraging the time that you have in a project before the system goes live, right? That's the cheapest time. Your cheapest time is in the preparation phase, where we can bake in a week to say, it's going to take me a week to build the server. Yeah, I know putting in a disk and installing some software is usually only a couple hours. We're going to take a week, take our time, script the build, baseline everything, and get all the logging and configuration set up. Because later on, in the middle of a breach or in a disaster recovery scenario or whatever, that's your most expensive time, right? The server's in business. There are workflows going on. You're now breaking the business by that asset being unavailable. It's very visible from your boss to your boss's boss all the way on up to the C-level. That's your most expensive time. So you really want to bankroll as much as possible in the preparation phase to get ready. Do your baselining and log everything. As we'll see in a few slides, logging is a key component to detecting and responding to breaches. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say here was also as part of the deployment of a new system, you want to integrate it into your incident management process, but also integrate it in your disaster recovery process. Because disaster recovery will tell you things such as, what is the impact of that asset being unavailable? What does it mean to the business when you can't work? And what are our steps that we should take to ensure the business can keep on being in business in the face of anything from a fire, flood, or, in this case, a security incident? So let's talk about identifying that security incident. Well, first we need a security incident, right? In our scenario, here's the incident. Matt built a server, he put it in place. There's a junior admin who's going through and notices that some of the drivers are a little bit out of date. You guys ever Google for free driver download? You know, that's a seedy part of the web, you know what I mean? And just seeing that in my search history makes me want to take a shower. Not a good place to be. So what happens is, here he is, he's searching free driver download, bad to begin with. He's logged onto the server, really bad. Why? Because he wants to update the drivers, of course. He's logged onto the server as admin, because he needs those extra rights to the drivers. And what happens? He gets the drivers downloaded, but he gets a little bit something extra. He gets hit with a Java drive-by download. And what effectively happens is a little bit of Java on one of the web pages he goes to, executes, installs some persistent software onto his computer. Now he's compromised. Now, right away he's infected. Within the next 12 hours, that infected computer will dial out, talk to the bad guys, and join their botnet. And this particular vulnerability is known as CVE 2012-4681, which just rolls off the tongue. But if you take a look at it, it's pretty nasty what's going on with Java these days, because a lot of our existing controls, Java Sandbox, memory controls within Windows, what have you, can now be completely bypassed. So it's just a matter of someone logging in on the wrong computer with the wrong credentials and hitting the wrong website, and it's game over. So what we need to do is identify when this happens. What we're looking for is indicators of a compromise. In putting together these slides over the past couple months, I'll share this with you. In my organization, we actually had a workstation that got hit by this Java exploit. It was a workstation, fortunately, not a server. But we saw it start to do things that tipped us off to know that it was infected. It went out and did a DNS lookup for some websites that we know are command and control centers. So we saw some DNS traffic. As Matt mentioned, you enable logging to catch that. We saw it trying to connect over non-standard ports on our firewall. And we saw it begin to behave in a way that indicated to us it was compromised. And when this happens, there's all sorts of other indications, right? I mean, software can be installed, new users can be created, new accounts can be registered within administrators, new processes are running on the machine, etc., etc. So we need to figure out what's going on, and we need to respond appropriately and make sure this really is a security incident. So Matt, how would you do that with PowerShell?
Well, one of the things is when you're going through an incident that you need to do is you need to always make sure that you keep good notes. Well, PowerShell built into it has two commands that will actually keep track of all of your commands you typed and the output, and anything else that goes on in your console during this. And this is called start and stop transcript. You run these commands at the beginning of your PowerShell session, at the end, or if you close your window, it automatically does a stop transcript. And this will actually record anything you do. So this is a wonderful thing to be able to do. So it's like built-in logging, you just got to turn it on. All right, so next thing you do is we need to compare to make sure that there is nothing is actually happening in the system. So as before, we did export CLI XML with some information, and we saved those into a file. And now these commands up here, we're actually importing that XML file, running the command that we did before again and saving it into a variable, and then doing a compare based on that information. And this command up here will actually show you if there are any new administrators on the machine from the time when we made the baseline. Other things that you do is, as we all know, is go through the event log to see if there's anything in the security log, in the application system, any of the logs that are on there. And PowerShell has commandlets get event log and show event log so that you can actually go through and piece information out, filter information, so you can actually get right down to the information you're looking at. One of the things I have happens to be a collection of all the security IDs that are indicators of logins, so that I can actually tell from point A to point B in a certain period of time who logged in, when, where, and how.
We mentioned that when we were looking through different websites for talks, we only saw two on the security B-sides. And one of them was at B-Sides Detroit by a gentleman named James Foster. And Foster is very interesting. This is what he does for a living. He is the response team. Companies have an incident, they bring him in. And he gave an interesting talk about what he sees that companies trip over, what he sees that limits his ability to respond during the identification phase, and what people could do in the preparation phase to make it easier. And what he hit on was logs, logs, logs. These are bullets directly from him. And I think it's fascinating coming from an expert. I mean, Matt and I are clearly experts in managing IT, but not necessarily in incident response. And Foster is the incident response guy. And he just kept coming back to this concept of logging. So if you think about it, what can we do with PowerShell? Well, logs not being turned on, that's pretty straightforward. We already covered that. Logs being broke, no one noticed. Well, we can set up a WMI and register events with PowerShell to keep track of the logs. Not containing sufficient detail, not knowing how to access or interpret the logs. These are things that in that preparation phase, when time is cheap, you practice. You practice pulling up your logs, you practice filtering them, etc. Logs overwhelming tools or logs being in unusable formats. Again, in a Windows environment, fortunately, with PowerShell being standardized across all the recent versions, it's not going to overwhelm your tools. It's in the right format. You just leverage PowerShell to pull it out. So it's fascinating what you can do with logging. In terms of key practices on this stage, record your session, as Matt mentioned. It's necessary for lesson learned. It's also necessary in the event that this goes to a court case. You also want to consider areas of your system as honey tokens. So if you think of like a honey pod, which is a system that should not be used or changed unless there was an accident or malicious activity. It's the same concept for areas of your system that should not be used or changed. Your local users, your administrators group, services, ports, applications, etc. Treat these as honey tokens, and when they change, treat that as an indicator of compromise. And you'd be so much more ahead, so much further ahead than some of these companies I mentioned before that is seen the Verizon breach reports that don't pick up on a breach for weeks, months, etc. And once you do pick up on a breach, treat your logs as a strategic defensive tool. Thinking about what Foster said in terms of preparing for and being very good at extracting information from your logs. So, all right, we've had a breach. Now we need to clean up after that breach. We need to contain it so it doesn't spread to other systems, and so that little breach in that one server, well, not so little, but that breach in that one server that's compromising our business activity does not spread and compromise our overall organization.
So this piece of PowerShell wizardry, as Wolf would call it, goes and runs on your system, and it actually kills any new process. So as you go through, things won't spawn. It just gives it a kill switch and turns it right off. This can be a lifesaver. Because we're a Windows environment, we use DFS to manage our data. DFS is the distributed file system by Microsoft, and it allows you to put your data out there, make it available for users, and your users will not necessarily know what server this relies on, but it goes and access at a central source so that if you need to move servers or change the location of the data because you're decommissioning a server, the users don't know and aren't impacted. So these two lines of PowerShell up here allow us to take and move the accounting folder from our primary to our backup file system. Of course, we're going to want to restore the data on the backup file server and do a differential and make sure that the information is all the appropriate stuff. But it's two simple PowerShell commands that will make your users' lives better because you just put their data back online. Next, we're going to talk about what I call a love square. I don't know why I call it a love square. I probably couldn't think of a better title for the slide, but PowerShell loves .NET, as we described earlier, as PowerShell is built on top of it. And SSH and .NET are friends because some very smart people out there wrote some SSH clients that utilize .NET. And then, of course, SSH and our switches are friends because how else are you going to manage them? Well, there's other ways, but I like to automate, so SSH is my friend with switches. So now PowerShell can be friends with our switches. It seems like a match made in heaven to me. So part of our measured response is we're going to want to take PowerShell and control our switches and set our quality of service so that the bandwidth coming in and going out of that server is limited so that then it doesn't take down our whole network because we're now spamming network traffic all over the place trying to find new avenues to infect. We also could quarantine the server, and we can do that again with a switch and PowerShell. We're just going to change the VLAN over for that port and then have your tools available on that separated quarantine VLAN so that you can get your job done. And finally, if worse comes to worse, you can also just kick your port down with PowerShell just by making sure your PowerShell scripts or commands go and function with SSH to the switch. You can knock it offline by shutting down the port.
In my environment, when I mentioned we did have a breach on a workstation, what I effectively did was I set up the networking to semi-quarantine that machine so the person could continue to work, but that machine could not talk to other machines and also could not talk to the internet. And we did that until the help desk was able to go to the person and clean up their machine. So that concept of a staged recovery is very important, where you move the system from network to network to network as you contain the affected security breach. The other thing that's very interesting is up front, you stop it by using PowerShell to stop new processes from spawning, which means the infection can't even start up. And then you move the data off. And once the data is off, you also move the business process off onto your recovery environment. This is a disaster recovery concept, but it's a very important concept because what that means is when a breach does occur on a critical asset, the company can keep working, right? People can keep working. It gives you more time to clean up. It reduces the impact on the organization and the impact on your career. And it also means that you have a more intelligent response to these breaches. But all around, the bottom line is we need to automate as many of these things as possible. The bad guys are automating their attacks all the time. That's why they're able to move so quickly. We can use PowerShell to automate as well and kick our game up a notch. So once we've got it contained, now we can move on to the eradication phase. And this is when we're bankrolling the time we spent in the preparation stages.
So because, as Wolf said, we spent time preparing and making sure that we are all set to go for the future, for anything that comes up, your rebuild time is important. One of the things that I've implemented where I work, and that the last thing that you would think about would be to put your scripts into a source control server. And this would actually make sure that you have the same script that you can run each time and without fear of it being changed because somebody changed it to make sure that, oh, we need to do this extra thing. This is a huge thing. But also, I tend to store my baselines in here as well, so that then going forward, I know that I have versions, so I can go back to see what data I committed to that, but also I can have the history over time of how things have changed on the server. So now I just pull down my scripts and run them, and after it's all said and done, I have a server back to my base. This will take me now hours, not days, to get to because of all my preparation before.
And that's a key practice right there, is preparing and then responding and recovering very quickly. The good old days, you had the myth of Wyatt Earp, right? You grabbed your cowboy hat and your 6-shooter and you walked down out to Main Street and stood eyeball to eyeball with the malware authors, software to software, and you cleaned up. You kicked butt, you cleaned up, you took names. I think one of the things we forget about, well, two things really, is one, the good days weren't that good. It was really a pain in the butt to clean up machines. And two, in many cases today, the machines will respond as if they're clean and will then wait a period of time and reinfect themselves. If you want an example of this, you can look at some of the analysis that's been done on Red October, where it's actually a two-stage infection, one that cleans itself up, and then once clean, waits for a period of time. You think you're done, take your cowboy hat off, put your 6-shooter away, you go back to your desk, and then it reinfects it. So rather than going down that road, take a very easy approach, wipe the system, go to your source control, grab your build scripts, replay them, and you can start fresh. So now that we've eradicated the system, right? So we had it in production, it got infected, we executed DR, we moved that system into a quarantine network, we contained the infection, we erased everything, we reloaded, we moved it back into the production network. Now it can recover our applications and our data.
Like I said before, we're using DFS in our network. So now, once our data has been recovered and our system's ready to go, we're going to just change our DFS links to be back to the way they originally were, again without users really noticing that there was a change on the back end. I love technology. Again, after we do this, we're going to go baseline the system again, because things may have changed, or there was a special case, we're rebuilding the server, we might as well do this while we're at it. So we're going to go through and redo our baselines, and like we said before, we're going to import this into our source control server so that we have a baseline of all the objects that we had before. And of course, no incident is complete without a complete password change across the environment. So here we're going to go ahead and change all the local user passwords to something other than what it currently is. So the one caveat I will tell you with this is that you're going to want to change different passwords for different accounts. Obviously, don't set all your accounts with the same password. But this is a quick, simple PowerShell, what they call one-liner, because it fits on one line in the screen, to replace your password on your local machine with what you want. And of course, we're going to change all the passwords and make best friends with our users by setting all their AD passwords to something new. Like I said before, this is great for a temporary situation and you force people to change their password. But also you're going to want to make sure they change this when you're done.
Make best friends with your users. I like that. That's funny. Who doesn't like a good password reset in the morning? No, that may seem like a little bit much, but if you think about it, it's very common for IT teams to use the same local administrator as password as they do the domain administrator password. And oftentimes you'll find the same thing for local user groups and local user accounts. So when a box has become infected, we don't know if they haven't compromised the local SAM database and gotten those hashes, or even cracked the hashes and not have the passwords. So it's very important we do execute that password command. Also, we want to start monitoring very closely after recovery to ensure there isn't a reinfection. The bad guys have now peered into our souls, as it were. They've got all the information they need for a phishing attack or social engineering attack, and we don't quite know for certain that we haven't restored back infected data or what have you. So the key practice at the recovery phase is to freeze changes after your baseline for a period of at least 2 weeks and ensure you don't have a reinfection. Watch your baselines and your honey tokens very, very closely. And that gets us to the lessons learned phase. I mean, in this scenario, we told you up front what the problem was, right? We had a junior admin searching for drivers, got us infected. But that's not always very clear. So you definitely have to go through your logs and do a good, solid due diligence process to figure out exactly what got us there and what we need to do now to prevent a reoccurrence.
One of the things that we'll do, especially on our servers, and I know that some people have this overwhelming urge to shut this off on the servers, but we're going to turn our IE hardening back on. So this is just some simple lines of PowerShell with the registry keys, stored into a variables, and we just set the item properties to a value. This is one of the great things about PowerShell is where we can now edit the registry via the command line, via script, via login scripts, so we can go ahead and do things. No more .reg files. We can do this all straight natively inside of PowerShell. Next, we're going to harden Java. Java has these two files, deployment.config and deployment.properties you can get from Oracle, that allow you to harden by the Java installation based on changing things inside the config and properties file. So all this does is this actually just takes and maps the drive to a remote computer, browses to make sure this Java is actually installed and at that path, then copy these two items from my local computer over to the Java installation directory. Real simple, quick, easy PowerShell that will save you a lot. Next, we're going to make sure that we want to get this on all computers. And because PowerShell and group policy are friends, we're going to go ahead and make a group policy object with this script inside of the group policy object. And we're going to go force and push this off to every computer on our network, because not only are the servers a vulnerability, but also are the workstations. So this is a great way to get all the computers in the whole network and then force DP update to run on that. Additionally, we may, for some period of time or forever, want to monitor system changes of certain files. So you can do this with PowerShell. There's a couple caveats with this. The code that I'm about to show you does go away when you close the PowerShell window. However, you can make permanent consumers, what they call in WMI speak, to allow you to have this happen forever on that box. with these events that you are going to do to monitor file system, you can write to your email host, your favorite SCIM, whatever else you want. You could write it out to your printer if that's what you feel like you need to do. So this PowerShell seems maybe like it's a little complicated, but it's really simple. It's using a .NET class called system.io.filesystemwatcher, and it actually watches and makes sure that anything that is created in our specified directory, we will be notified. This just writes it to a screen saying, hey, this file has changed, but you can do on create, on change, on deletion, and other events as well.
And that's pretty much it from a lessons learned phase. What do we know? Well, we know that the person was Googling drivers on a server logged in as administrator, and that the Java was then compromised. What can we do to prevent a reoccurrence? Well, technically, as Matt mentioned, we can harden IE so it doesn't work for browsing the web. We can harden Java so that if a jar file is opened via IE, or maybe they put on Chrome, that it doesn't execute and that it prevents an infection. And then we can monitor areas of the file system. Now, on the policy side, you want to do things such as implement a policy that says, perhaps, no drivers that haven't been QA'd, no web browsing on servers, etc., etc. All this boils down to looking at your incident, figuring out what happened, and implementing technical controls in such a way that you can reduce the risk of a further occurrence. And I like the group policy concept too. I mean, we can implement it directly with PowerShell tactically, but if we now want to make that our policy across the entire organization, we can extend that out and put it directly into a group policy object that will be reapplied from then on forward. So that, in and of a nutshell, is our scenario today. Today, the scenario we looked at was we prepared for an incident using build scripts, baselining, and enabling logging in several key systems, including DNS. Then an incident occurred when a junior admin was searching for drivers on the web. We identified that incident occurred because of changes to the baseline. Some software was being installed, some processes were running, what have you. We identified that malware was present because it was checking out on DNS. It was connecting out over high-level ports on the firewall. So we knew something bad was going on. We contained that by moving that system onto its own network. But before we did that, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. I just want to contain it right away. We contained it by replicating off the data first, making sure no new processes can start to prevent the infection from spreading. And then once the business is working off the recovery environment, we went ahead and moved that box onto its own network, where we wiped the hard drive, reloaded it, reapplied the build scripts, redid our baselines, put it back into production, moved the data off, and now we're highly monitoring it. We changed all the passwords, we monitor the file system, and we put in place some changes to reduce the likelihood of a future infection.
So one of the things that Wolf and I are involved in is something called PowerShell Security, or PoshSec. It is a module that we are working on, PowerShell, to help you better utilize this in the InfoSec space. It's more from the blue side. We may have some red stuff in there, but generally we're going to focus on the blue. This project was started by the late Will Steele. He passed away on December 24th of 2 types of cancer at a young age. And I have taken upon myself to carry the torch and move this project forward. We're currently working on a release. I don't have a release date yet, but I'm hoping that maybe by B-Sides Detroit, we should probably have some stuff out there for people to use. If you're already using PowerShell and want to have a voice for your ideas on how to use PowerShell for security, you can email us at team@poshsec.com, and you can be a guest blogger. Or if you want help with a project, shoot us one of an email. I'm sure we'll both listen to your ideas and see if it's a good fit.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. You know, Security incidents do not have to have an adverse effect on our organization. Security incidents do not have to have an adverse effect on our careers. Incident management does not need to be synonymous with time to update LinkedIn. Utilizing technologies such as PowerShell and utilizing the practice of incident management, we can prepare for and gracefully recover from breaches. So I really thank you for your time tonight and letting Matt and I come out and cover this. Here's our information if you have any questions. As Matt mentioned, the PowerShell we covered today as part of incident response is part of PoshSec. The link for PoshSec is down below. And we'll also have a recording of this talk available for you on that website. So thank you all, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you. Have a good night.